It does not enter into our plan to set down here the proofs of transformism. We wish only to explain in a word or two why we shall accept it, in the present work, as a sufficiently exact and precise expression of the facts actually known. The idea of transformism is already in germ in the natural classification of organized beings. The naturalist, in fact, brings together the organisms that are like each other, then divides the group into subgroups within which the likeness is still greater, and so on. All through the operation, the characters of the group appear as general themes on which each of the subgroups performs its particular variation. Now such is just the relation we find in the animal and in the vegetable world between the generator and the generated, on the canvas which the ancestor passes on, and which his descendants possess in common. Each puts his own original embroidery. True, the differences between the descendant and the ancestor are slight, and it may be asked whether the same living matter presents enough plasticity to take in turn such different forms as those of a fish, a reptile, and a bird, but to this question observation gives a peremptory answer. It shows that up to a certain period in its development, the embryo of the bird is hardly distinguishable from that of the reptile, and that the individual develops, throughout the embryonic life in general, a series of transformations comparable to those through which, according to the theory of evolution, one species passes into another. A single cell, the result of the combination of two cells, male and female, accomplishes this work by dividing. Every day before our eyes, the highest forms of life are springing from a very elementary form. Experience, then, shows that the most complex has been able to issue from the most simple by way of evolution. Now, has it arisen so as a matter of fact? Paleontology, in spite of the insufficiency of its evidence, invites us to believe it has, for where it makes out of the order of succession of species with any precision, this order is just what considerations drawn from embryogeny and comparative anatomy would lead anyone to suppose, and each new paleontological discovery brings transformism a new confirmation. Thus, the proof drawn from mere observation is ever being strengthened, while, on the other hand, experiment is removing the objections one by one. The recent experiments of H. de Vries, for instance, by showing that important variations can be produced suddenly and transmitted regularly, have overthrown some of the greatest difficulties raised by the theory. They have enabled us greatly to shorten the time biological evolution seems to demand. They also render us less exacting toward paleontology, so that all things considered, the transformist hypothesis looks more and more like a close approximation to the truth. It is not rigorously demonstrable, but failing the certainty of a theoretical or experimental demonstration, there is a probability which is continually growing, due to evidence which, while coming short of direct proof, seems to point persistently in its direction. Such is the kind of probability that the theory of transformism offers. Let us admit, however, that transformism may be wrong. Let us suppose that species are proved by inference or by experiment to have arisen by a discontinuous process, of which today we have no idea. Would the doctrine be affected insofar as it has a special interest or importance for us? Classification would probably remain in its broad lines. The actual data of embryology would also remain. The correspondence between comparative embryology and comparative anatomy would remain too. Therefore, biology could and would continue to establish between living forms the same relations and the same kinship as transformism supposes today. It would be, it is true, an ideal kinship and no longer a material affiliation. But as the actual data of paleontology would also remain, we should still have to admit that it is successively, not simultaneously, that the forms between which we find an ideal kinship have appeared. Now the evolutionist theory, so far as it has any importance for philosophy, requires no more. It consists above all in establishing relations of ideal kinship, and in maintaining that wherever there is this relationship of, so to speak, logical affiliation between forms, there is also a relation of chronological succession between the species in which these forms are materialized. Both arguments would hold in any case, and hence an evolution somewhere would still have to be supposed, whether in a creative thought in which the ideas of the different species are generated by each other exactly as transformism holds that species themselves are generated on the earth, or in a plan of vital organization immanent in nature, which gradually works itself out, in which the relations of logical and chronological affiliation between pure forms are just those which transformism presents as relations of real affiliation between living individuals, or finally in some unknown cause of life, which develops its effects as if they generated one another. Evolution would then simply have been transposed, made to pass from the visible to the invisible. Almost all that transformism tells us today would be preserved, open to interpretation in another way. Will it not, therefore, be better to stick to the letter of transformism as almost all scientists profess it? Apart from the question to what extent the theory of evolution describes the facts and to what extent it symbolizes them, there is nothing in it that is irreconcilable with the doctrines it has claimed to replace, even with that of special creations, to which it is usually opposed. For this reason, we think the language of transformism forces itself now upon all philosophy, as the dogmatic affirmation of transformism forces itself upon science. But then, we must no longer speak of life in general as an abstraction, or as a mere heading under which all living beings are inscribed. At a certain moment, In certain points of space, a visible current has taken rise. This current of life, traversing the bodies it has organized one after another, passing from generation to generation, has become divided amongst species and distributed amongst individuals without losing anything of its force, rather intensifying in proportion to its advance. It is well known that, on the theory of the continuity of the germplasm maintained by Weismann, the sexual elements of the generating organism pass on their properties directly to the sexual elements of the organism engendered. In this extreme form, the theory has seemed debatable, for it is only in exceptional cases that there are any signs of sexual glands at the time of segmentation of the fertilized egg. But, though the cells that engender these sexual elements do not generally appear at the beginning of the embryonic life, it is nonetheless true that they are always formed out of those tissues of the embryo which have not undergone any particular functional differentiation, and whose cells are made of unmodified protoplasm. In other words, the genetic power of the fertilized ovum weakens, the more it is spread over the growing mass of the tissues of the embryo. But while it is being thus diluted, it is concentrating anew something of itself on a certain special point, to wit, the cells, from which the ova or spermatozoa will develop. It might therefore be said that, although the germplasm is not continuous, there is at least continuity of genetic energy, this energy being expended only at certain instants, for just enough time to give the requisite impulsion to the embryonic life, and being recouped as soon as possible in new sexual elements, in which, again, it bides its time. Regarded from this point of view, life is like a current passing from germ to the medium of a developed organism. It is as if the organism itself were only an excrescence, a bud caused to sprout by the former germ endeavoring to continue itself in a new germ. The essential thing is the continuous progress indefinitely pursued, and invisible progress, on which each visible organism rides during the short interval of time given it to live.